We're going to bring on now Manju Kulkarni, who is the co-founder of Stop AAPI Hate. Manju's been on the front lines of what we've been discussing on this show. You know, we were very fortunate to receive a stipend from the state of California to talk about Asian American hate crimes, and I know Manju and her group, her coalition, has been at the forefront of keeping track of all this. So, Manju, I really appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us as we try to break down these very convoluted, complicated issues because there are some foreign dynamics, there are local dynamics. Give people your perspective, since I mean you're consuming all this data that folks like us have to digest afterwards.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, our organization, Stop AAPI Hate, was created in March of 2020, so just 3 years ago, to monitor and analyze what we saw as the emergence of anti-Asian hate. Since that time, we've received over 11,000 incident reports from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. And I think what it tells us is that while our community has been long ignored, that in fact, we have been, unfortunately, the recipients of much hate and discrimination, some of it fueled by racist rhetoric, which you both mentioned in the earlier segment. And now we are seeing once again policies that are also discriminatory against our communities.
So Manju, when you're seeing this on the front lines, I mean, there's been some funding issued by the state of California to help kind of Asian Americans, rise up, right? There was about $150 million allocation for the first time. Has that made a difference? I think that's important to note now that you've been in the trenches for a couple of years doing this. Obviously, we saw a rise of hate crimes during COVID. Has this kind of investment made an impact?
Absolutely. So, funds went, to a number of different organizations across the state. My local organization, AAPI Equity Alliance, is the regional lead for a project. Really, the funding in LA that goes to 24 organizations. There are many others across the state, and it's investments that are necessary to address the hate that communities are experiencing, whether they be Chinese American, Korean, Thai, South Asian, Japanese, Filipino. We know that anti-Asian hate impacts all AAPI groups, even including Pacific Islanders. And so what those funds do is allow direct services for community members, victims who've been impacted by hate, violence, and discrimination. It also goes toward prevention efforts. And so I think this funding is critical, and we hope that it'll continue moving forward because we're already starting to see ways in which it is really provided the help and support our communities need.
You know, Manju, as journalists, what we've been doing just the past few years, Stop AAPI Hate has been a tremendous resource, right? It's a place where a lot of journalists have been going. It's been the one-stop shop to get data, the latest, trends, and so on and so forth. I've actually referenced Stop AAPI Hate several times in a few of my stories. With that said, though, I know you guys aren't partisan, right? At the same time, how do you deal with critics who say that you guys lean liberal, you lean left?
I mean, the data is the data. So I guess I would need to know more in terms of where those accusations come from, what that's based on. I think that what we do is certainly the organizations that make up Stop AAPI Hate have been working in our communities for, combined 100 years. And so I think we know and understand the needs of the community, and we are able to put what we're seeing in context. So, for example, you mentioned in the last segment what we see as a reemergence of the alien land laws. So these are laws that in the 20th century prevented immigrants from owning property and literally stole rightfully owned property from thousands of Asian Americans in California and 13 other states. And that's what we're seeing now again. The Texas law, some of the other, the Texas bill, and other bills that have been introduced in the Georgia, Virginia, Montana legislatures. What I'd like to see is what is the evidence that individuals who are not U.S. citizens are buying property for nefarious purposes. My own parents were immigrants who bought property when we lived in the United States as when I was a child, and there was nothing illegal, there's nothing inappropriate about that, right? So why are we now causing suspicion on individuals who happen to be Chinese nationals whose children are U.S. citizens just simply because their race or ethnicity? That what is the evidence that they have done anything wrong or they plan to do anything wrong other than raise their children, contribute to our economy, to our businesses, our academic institutions, hospitals? Without any evidence, I see no reason for such laws. And I think it's really back to the scapegoating that our data shows is happening all across our country.
Well, speaking of data, Manju, what I was going to ask you about is, and on this show, we basically say out loud what everyone's thinking. And it's so important you bring up this point because, the data is the data. But at the end of the day, and I think this is where a lot of journalists in the mainstream media fail, is it's to synthesize the data, contextualize the data. What does it mean for each community? And one of the issues that, again, that is discussed about among Asian Americans on all sides of the aisle is the raw reality that so many of these videos that have emerged over the past few years are black or brown perpetrators beating the heck out of an Asian grandma or grandpa. Yet, at least on your website and on others, I just haven't seen at least on the mainstream, a real analysis of this. Why are we seeing so many, people of color, black and brown folks beating up on Asian Americans? And why aren't we talking more about this?
Well, let me say this. First off, we don't collect perpetrator data, but I can tell you that researchers at University of Michigan and Maryland have done a number of studies, and we also have hate crimes reports from cities like LA and others that show actually most perpetrators are not African American. So what I think is happening is that often mainstream media and social media highlights those incidents that have black perpetrators. And in fact, that is how white supremacy works, right? Where all of us feed into ideas of African Americans being criminals, that Asians are suspect and not to be trusted, that they're perpetual foreigners, that Latinx community members are, illegal immigrants. I mean, this is all part of white supremacy. And so that is why I posit that we see more depictions of African Americans. When we look at who has killed more Asian Americans in terms of these crimes, the Atlanta shooter was a white supremacist, right? He was not from the African American community. The individual who killed Sikh Americans in Indianapolis was a white supremacist. So what happened in Oak Creek, Wisconsin 10 years ago was perpetrated by a white supremacist. So what are the most horrific crimes were actually committed by individuals who are not only white, but actually believe in white nationalism and white supremacy.
No, that's a good point. What I'd like to see, though, and like you said, there is no actual data about the perpetrators. I'm just wondering why and who's willing to do that and be courageous enough to touch that, because these are the conversations that I'm having in the Asian American community. Everyone's afraid to say it out loud that, oh my gosh, it's another black person beating up an Asian grandma, because they don't want to get canceled in this culture. All I'm saying, let's talk more about that. How did we get to this point? Because even my black friends are saying, yes, it's happening. We see it. These people are idiots. My people are beating the hell out of your people, and it's a bad look for us. Yet we leave the conversation there. We try to explain it into different directions, and I just want to see some data. And I'm hoping maybe you guys will look into that. Is there a reason why you guys aren't looking into the perpetrators right now?
I mean, we have not collected that data from the beginning. I think when we look at policies, right, and policy solutions, which is much of what our work involves. And in fact, we had 2 bills in the California legislature that passed last year and were signed by the governor. We have a new bill this year relating to public transit and funding for surveys that help us understand how to make community safer. That when you look at policy solutions, then race doesn't matter, right? Because the policy solutions that we have are about what we need to do moving forward to make all of our communities feel safer. But there are a number of public institutions that collect that data. As I mentioned, the LA County Human Relations Commission has done, they issue a hate crimes report every single year, and they've never found that a majority of perpetrators are African American. So the data that we have shows that that's simply not true.
Manju, getting to something that was very traumatic for Asian Americans were the shootings in Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay. I mean, those were Asian American shooters that maimed and killed so many people in the state of California, which is a super diverse state. I mean, what kind of impact has this COVID pandemic have had on these communities of color? Has mental illness been looked into? I'm really trying to get to the root causes of why we're having such disconnects. I mean, Jonathan brings up a strong point in the sense that we are connected now through these social devices, right? You have your cell phone on you, and you see the scourge going on, right? We see incidences, whether they're in Florida or in Washington or even around the world, where we're seeing these hyper local episodes that are now inflamed across the globe. And it's something that happens in India today or in China, we actually get it within moments through social media. And I think there's been all these different episodes that folks have been going through the last couple of years. I mean, have you been able to peel back the layers about, why in particular Asian Americans, and I'm sure there's other communities that feel targeted too, but just to talk about Asian Americans specifically, have you been able to peel back where this is coming from?
Well, certainly when we look at Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay, what's the commonality there? Easy access to guns, right? No other country in the world has the type of gun violence and the levels that we have. We've already had 100 mass shootings in the United States in just 2023 in less than 100 days. And so I think that Asian Americans, like other Americans, have easy access to what are weapons of war, assault weapons, AR-15s, others that can kill many people in just a few seconds or minutes. And that's what we had in Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay. So I think, every nation in the world has individuals with mental health problems and individuals who've experienced personal trauma, but they don't have the level of killings that we have in the United States. So I think that's what we really need to look at. I understand that President Biden is coming to Monterey Park next week to speak about gun violence and the fact that we don't have laws that prohibit assault weapons, right? We're not talking about personal safety. We're talking about killing many, many people within short amounts of time. And I think that's the conversation that needs to be had. And when we look at AAPI data, they found that a strong majority of individuals in the AAPI community support sensible gun safety measures. And so I think that's really where the conversation needs to go.
Manju, despite maybe some of our differences or the way we see the data, differently, I know that we all want to make sure that this topic, stop AAPI hate, continues to be out there in the narrative, right? Especially in the mainstream media, because it's not. What are your thoughts on the way the mainstream media has covered it initially and where it's at now? And especially here in Seattle, I can tell you, I'm a big fan of Mayor Bruce Harrell, but when there was a budget deficit in the city this past year, the first place he went to cut was the AAPI hate budget. And we're seeing this across the nation. So what are your thoughts on the role of the mainstream media and how do you keep this important story going? Because unfortunately, it keeps happening. I don't want you to have a job. I want Stop AAPI Hate to go away if at all possible. I'd love for you to move on, but it has to be here. And you guys are doing good work. So I know that was a mouthful, but what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, thank you for your kind words. And we did issue a statement regarding the mayor's actions
Yep.
in Seattle. We think that there need to continue to be, um, you know, resources put in to our communities, just as we have in the state of California with what Ravi spoke about earlier, which is investments in our communities, in our community-based organizations. I mean, I think what we're seeing now is much of our work started with COVID-19, but you see that scapegoating, right, that involves not just public health, but also economic anxiety and national security. And if I may talk a little bit about, what we are seeing, even in terms of the public and the mainstream media's response, which is, Congresswoman Judy Chu was scapegoated essentially in terms of her support for Dominic Ng, someone that President Biden had nominated to a important position related to our financial systems. And I think it was that Congressman Gooden was critiquing, is a nomination of a Chinese American just because he was Chinese, and saying that Judy Chu was also to be questioned, right? Simply because she's Chinese American, despite the fact that she was born and raised in the United States, has spent all of her life in California and in Washington. So this is the next level of what we're seeing, is that racist rhetoric is being weaponized even on folks in the halls of Congress, as well as on each and every one of us. And it's leading back to the policies like alien land laws that prevent us from living and thriving in the United States simply, again, because of our racial background.
Well, before we let you go, Manju, I want to leave you on this. I mean, we are seeing all kinds of these kind of micro issues that are bubbling to the surface here in the United States. That's part of the reason we did this show. Is whether it's AAPI hate crimes, or for that matter, we've been talking about caste on this show, and there's all these different discrimination laws, and it's caused all kinds of stuff where people are irate at why a micro minority like the Indian community or the Hindu community feels targeted. What can be done? Because we have this giant coalition throughout this country, 50 states, virtually all of us come from different backgrounds. We have different points of views. What can we do to get people to get along better? Because certainly we see the division that's taking place here. And I know you're one cog trying to focus in on the Asian American experience, but certainly Hispanics have challenges, African Americans have challenges, the broader framework. And of course, when we look at white America, there's a lot of folks that feel left behind. So as a thought leader in this space, what do you think we have to do to get this country more united and not just working on these wedge issues?
Right. I think that's a great question. And, let me paraphrase something that was said by a former white supremacist, white nationalist, who was invited to the White House for a United Against Hate event that I happened to attend. When he was asked by reporter Lisa Ling about what needs to be done to prevent hate, right? What needs to be done so that our communities get along? His answer was so interesting. He said, we need strong public education. We need affordable housing. We need safe streets. We need less gun violence. So he didn't talk about Band-Aid measures. He didn't talk about, people coming together and singing Kumbaya. He talked about the things that government is good at when it actually tackles these issues, which is the needs of everyday citizens. When they don't have their needs met, they then can succumb to the racializing and weaponizing of racist rhetoric, which unfortunately a lot of our politicians do very well, right? Rather than solving the problems of everyday community members, what they do is blame immigrants, they blame Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinx community members for their woes, rather than investing in those communities, rather than trying to provide strong public schools, housing that people can afford, good, solid jobs with a living wage. So these, to me, are the solutions that we need. And I think that will drive down hate, not simply engaging in rhetorical conversations sort of over and over again.
Manju, I want to get in one last quick question, and before I kick it over to Ravi, but he was bringing up the point about sort of this movement in this country to bring up all these caste discrimination bills, right? And it's really impacting the South Asian community. And here in Seattle, just in the past few weeks, Council Member Shama Sawant, who's Indian American, introduced a caste discrimination bill, and it passed with flying colors. Yet at the same time, I think a lot of these council members really don't know what these are about, and they're just kind of rubber stamping these. So from kind of Stop AAPI's standpoint, it's almost like there's like a civil war going on in the South Asian community based on class or caste or religion. How are you guys kind of sorting all of that out? And where do you guys stand on this?
Right. Well, I will say, and thank you for that question. We have not issued a statement directly about caste discrimination, coming from the South Asian community. I think it is very real. And I think that, what you've often seen is individuals at, these large tech companies who do discriminate against lower caste staff members. And so I think, if we are truly to fight discrimination in our communities, we have to do that not just when outsiders or those in another racial group discriminate against us, but even when those within our own communities discriminate. So I think those are very positive policies, and I'm certainly on a personal level in support of more of those being passed across our nation.
Well, Manju, we really appreciate your time. I know that is a consistent debate that we're going to have on this show, because obviously there's folks that are on both sides on that particular issue. But I thank you so much for all the work you do, all the data that you folks provide at Stop AAPI Hate. Manju Kulkarni, co-founder of Stop AAPI, thanks for dropping by.
We need you back. We really do.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.